clearly the last session of the day, in case you didn't notice. And it is also a live recording of a podcast. I'm not sure who Paytech Pulse is. Nick, perhaps you know. But this is the Pay CLT Payments Hub podcast. We are not rebranding to the Paytech Pulse podcast. And if Paytech Pulse is a sponsor, then check them out. But this is the Pay CLT Payments Hub podcast. I'm excited to have David here today. We're going to talk a lot about insurance, we're going to talk about banking, and we're going to talk about just innovation in general.
It's going to be a party. It's
going to be awesome. Let me lean into the mic a little bit, make sure you can hear me. All right, David, so why don't we start out by having you tell us a little bit about yourself. We're going to jump into all kinds of questions, but tell us who you are.
Sure. So David Tate, I am Director of Digital Member Strategy, which is sort of a new title, so I'm getting used to that. But I work for Blue Cross North Carolina. Blue Cross, if you're not familiar, we're one of a number of franchisees associated with Blue Cross Blue Shield of America. And so we are dedicated to the health and well-being of all North Carolinians. That'll come up a little later, but that's really important to the services we provide. I have only been with Blue Cross North Carolina for about a year and a half. I come to this from a career, first 20 plus years of my career have been in banking, financial services, card management, customer lifecycle marketing, and things like that. So it's kind of an interesting journey to take, but this was an opportunity to take what I had learned on the financial services side and working with banks and apply it in a completely new and different way and follow some leadership that was taking sort of a similar path. So I will find myself in some familiar territory with some people that have come to Blue Cross North Carolina from banking as well. And as we've said a couple of times, the more bankers we can get there, the smarter we'll become. Don't tell anybody at Blue Cross I said that.
We're going to talk a lot about that and the kind of blending of this experience. But my first question is the most important. Explain the Blue Cross Blue Shield to me. Like, what is Blue Cross and what is Blue Shield and what does that mean?
Oh, so a history lesson. Well, so this is interesting. So it is a combination of entities over time. It uses a franchise model, right? So there are in some states, North Carolina is interesting. We just have the one Blue Cross, so okay. Blue Cross North Carolina.
No Blue Shield, just Blue Cross.
No, we just shorten it to Blue Cross North Carolina. Okay. It's just a mouthful, right? BC, BSA, BCA, whatever. It's a sort of alphabet soup. So, but in some states, there are multiple blues at play. There are some, the entities can be not-for-profit, which is what Blue Cross North Carolina is. Some are for, so they have different holding structures and so forth. We have been in the news a little bit lately for some shifting we're going to do. We're going to create a holding company that has some political ramifications, that has some entity ramifications. Please don't ask me about that. I have nothing to say, nor could I even speak logically or coherently on that.
Fair enough. All right, well, we'll get back to the main topic. One of the interesting things about this conference is the combination of the insurance side and the financial services side, right? And it's in the name itself. So it feels like a pretty fitting closing session to kind of bring those two back together, and that's why I was excited about having you here, because as you mentioned, you come from a financial services background, heavy on the bank side, and find yourself in an insurance company. So what have you found to be some of the kind of most applicable lessons learned, if you will, that you've carried over into your new role?
Yeah, it's funny, that reminds me of another session I was in. Someone said, you don't find insurance finds you. And I feel like that's sort of what happened, right? Sort of an opportunistic kind of approach, and all of a sudden there's this opportunity to say, hey, you like big challenges, and I'm always up for a big challenge, and so we are sort of helping to modernize some payment technologies and structures and user experiences for Blue Cross North Carolina members. That's not dissimilar to what I was doing with my previous bank, which was First Citizens Bank, which is also a North Carolina-based entity. So, a lot of the overlaps are pretty tremendous. I was just prior working in digital banking and doing a lot of the payments, money transfers and so forth related to that. Bill pay was one of my products. It's kind of an important one, right? I just flipped the table now, and now I'm on the opposite side of that whole scenario, and sort of seeing it from a different perspective. Obviously, seeing it from the bank side, you have a finite segment, which you're really used to dealing with. So First Citizens had a really, it's really sweet spot of clients and in our consumer base and business base. With Blue Cross North Carolina, I get to expand that quite a bit, right? Because now I'm responsible for health and well-being of all North Carolinians. So what does that mean, right? That gets to be kind of interesting when you say, well, I have to not only just take care of this certain sweet spot. What is the sweet spot? Well, it's all North Carolinians. So now we're talking multiple demographics across the board, all demographics or socioeconomic statuses. And so the solutions that we have in place for around accepting payments, primarily we're talking about a lot of what we've done in the last 18 months is look at this from the folks that are self-paying their way. So, a lot of us are lucky enough that we're in a group plan and your employer is paying your monthly premiums for you. That's great. Not everyone is that lucky. Right. And there's a lot of folks that are out there that are it's on their own to go and navigate healthcare.gov. Or if they have traditionally, here's the tough one, when someone has been in a group plan their whole life and then they retire, they're all of a sudden they're over 65 and now they have to navigate Medicare. Oh my, right? There's a lot of just pitfalls and just, you need help doing that. Well, we consider ourselves, our members, and so part of this is how do we make sure that we keep the member in the mix? And make sure that as they're navigating the premium payments experiences and others, that we keep that, all of those situations that they may find themselves in, which could change month to month, right? As the ability to pay changes and things like that. But those are the types of things that we have to think about. It's just a completely different paradigm than I was used to. So part of the challenge, but also just an incredible opportunity.
Do you use any of the same tools or approaches that you did in identifying, whether it's the user personas you're identifying and how to build product for them, or just how you think through what solutions might be applicable?
Yeah, yes. A lot of the same thinking, use case driven, data driven, those type things have always been sort of at the core of how I've tried to make decisions and try to stay proactive, versus say, well, we just need a bill pay solution or we just need this, so let's just go find the best one. That's one way to do it. But I think posturing ourselves and what we were doing at First Citizens before I left and what we're moving to a new model at Blue Cross North Carolina is we're posturing ourselves to accept value and take payments, assist in payment transactions, notifications, and so forth, geared on what the member's telling us, or what they're not saying necessarily overtly, but what they're telling us with their actions. But we're also paying complete. You have to keep in mind what they're telling others as well. Like not just insurance is one of the many bills that people have to pay. There are so many that they're having to contend with. So you have to pay attention to just overall consumerism and the types of interactions that they're having elsewhere. Can you apply that thinking here? And the answer is generally yes. Right. You just have to make sure that that's the center of the design for any of the products and services that we come up with.
Got it. Okay. Well, one of the other dimensions that I think is a little different is, when you talk to especially larger banks, thinking about the unbanked customer, right? They care about it because they need to put a good foot forward from a social responsibility standpoint. They need to say that they're looking after those customers. But at the end of the day, they're not making money off of them. They view it in a very different way, right? And some banks do a better job than others.
Sure.
Clearly, in your new role, that's a lot more kind of prevalent and important part of the kind of customer segment, if you will, right?
It is.
Because whether they're banked or not has no impact on whether they need insurance or not, right?
That's right.
So they become a kind of more typical customer. How do you think about building products or solving for those particular customers?
One of the biggest challenges we face with that segment, and I think for North Carolina, just to throw a few numbers out at you, there's like 3.5% of North Carolinians are considered unbanked based on 2021 FDIC National Survey of Unbanked and Underbanked. There's an additional 14.5 that are estimated to be underbanked. So, and those are in our backyard, right, so to speak, and they don't have the traditional product set at their disposal. What are you going to do? How do you position yourself? How do you posture yourself to get those? Cash payments is something that's right, really, really important, right? And from a security aspect, a number of years ago, we decided that it was no longer acceptable for us to take cash payments in our Blue branded stores. from a security standpoint, I get it. I totally get it. It makes sense. We're not in the cash management business. There's risk that's associated with doing that. But now what have we done to the folks that need it? And so some of the things that we're talking about and working to regain access to that, it's funny, initially we thought, well, the way to solve the problem is to let our stores and our agents in our stores take cash again. That's one way to solve it. We're 47% of North Carolinians are within 20 miles of a Blue store. It's still 20 miles, right? And so that's only half. But I bet you that those and more are within a mile or two from Walmart, Walgreens, Family Dollar, Dollar General, and places where there is an access point there through things like Vanilla Direct and other mechanisms, networks, so that you can actually access payments, people that are going to Walmart to make a lot of their other utility payments. Why aren't we there? And so we asked that question. That changes a little bit of just the user experience. Now that's something, taking advantage of something sort of a product off the shelf, but applying it in a way that no one had really thought about. And that can be really meaningful. What does that do? When you know you need to be, it's better for us, better for them, if they make that healthcare premium payment. And you'd rather be among the first to get paid at the beginning of the month versus the end. And so just having access to things like, thinking ways to accept cash in more places. Now we'll still have the store problem to solve, and we'll solve that. But I think the better problem to solve and the one that's going to have the most impact is trying to get into retail networks and take cash payments. And what that could look like, right? Even though you might call them unbanked or underbanked, they're not unphoned. Right. 85% of consumers are walking around with a smartphone. So what if I could deliver a QR code or a barcode that could be shown at your local Walgreens or pharmacy, Walmart, and you could actually make that cash payment into the network. And if your premium payment was $100, there might be a $1 fee on it, there might not be. We're still looking through what that experience is going to wind up being and what we take to market, but just gives you access to take advantage of that. And if we're talking about the health and well-being of folks, that financial health and well-being is part of that. And if they're going to bed at night and they know that they are taken care of and covered, and they're offering their family health care coverage, that's better for them, that's better for us.
Yeah, I was thinking that outside of the actual facilitating the payment or the cash flow aspect of it, are there other dimensions or cash acceptance? Are there other dimensions of that user population that you think about, whether it's cash flow or it's in how to structure products in a way that have different payment payment cadences? Or I'm just thinking, I don't know the answer. I'm just thinking of how else. I would imagine there are a number of things that are different, right? When you're looking at in any user segment where they're maybe managing cash flow more tightly, or again, to try to prioritize their investment in health and their own health. What do you do to help them make that easy for them, basically?
Well, you bring up a good point. That's the unbanked is a very important segment. The Medicare segment, senior market, is also incredibly important. A lot of that, 15% of that population, is relying on their monthly Social Security check for 90% or more of their monthly income. Now, I don't exactly know when Social Security funds get delivered, but I know that if you sign up for auto pay for your premium with Blue Cross, we draft your account on the 5th of every month. It's sort of the Henry Ford model. You can have it drafted any day you want as long as it's the 5th. What if your Social Security check funds arrive on the 7th? Are you going to sign up for auto pay? Auto pay is better for the customer because they don't set it and forget it. It's better for us. I'm not sending, it's a paperless process. I no longer have to generate bill or process a check payment, which is about $1.22 for anyone who's, right? So all of those costs are just adding up. But we have a sort of a challenge. We've set this sort of status that we process auto pay on the 5th of every month. Well, that's not really postured toward the member, right? Because if I could set that within a range, then my senior market population would be more likely to sign up for that. Again, better for them, better for us. So just sort of figuring out where those pain points are, those points of friction, and just blowing them up.
How do you find them? How do you find? I know it seems obvious sometimes when that's your job, but How do you even find that that's a pain point?
So I thought when I first joined Blue Cross that we would spend the first 12 months or so just seeking and finding these, all of these issues. And what I found was the Blue Cross members, there's a ton of listening posts that have been put in place. Voice of customer is very, very important to Blue Cross, which I think is fantastic. So I walked in, and versus I needed to seek out problems, I was just hit with a deluge. And it was like this. And some of my team's here with me. And we were just kind of sort of blown away with like, oh my gosh, well, we have job security if we have nothing else, right? But we found that, what's the approach? And I think the mindset was have David and team drop in and just start picking off problems, right? And so we could do a lot of that. And I can talk about some of those pain points. But a lot of the pain points were just right there in front of us. And we realized that a lot of the pain points were really were symptoms of some underlying problems, right? So in healthcare, right? So I'm like, let's just diagnose the problem and let's seek and find it. Let's find the cure and then stop treating the symptoms, right? And so that's a journey, right? That's a long, long journey. So again, job security, I'm good at Blue Cross for a while. But I think where we're finding those specific things, it was not really hard to do. And then, but it's an interesting dilemma. I work for a company that, again, pays my group premium. So when it comes to the premium pain points, not something that's real for me, right? And so you have to have really good customer, voice of customer and listening posts and things across the board. And we did a lot of surveying early on as well. Are we offering the right types of payment channels? Are we offering enough, and so forth? And obviously, we were hearing, not that there was a lot of completely you guys are terrible, that type of stuff. Our app rating is still pretty solid and all those things. But there was just opportunity for more. And so things like that you would normally expect to find when you're making payments and doing any kind of shopping, things like offering a payment wallet, right? So collecting and remembering your last payment device and offering to use that the next time you come in to pay. Don't have it. We will. If you have 3 policies with us, let's say you have healthcare and dental and vision, well, today's experience, it's better for us on the back end, back office, for those payments to come in, and we settle and reconcile those separately. So if we have to reimburse a payment on the dental, then we just have the one payment.
Single transaction.
Yeah. But why can't we fix the user experience and put a shopping cart in? We can process that however we want on the back end, but we make that the single point of payment up front, and then we'll take care of it for the member on the back end. So things like that, just trying to make sure that we are at parity, right? There's a lot of the figuring out the things that are part of the normal consumer experience that around payments that people expect, and bringing up coming to par on that.
I think one of the tricky bits when you're doing voice of the customer, generally capturing customer feedback, is separating the kind of signal from the noise a little bit, right? Because people will complain about everything, but that doesn't mean that everything is necessarily a problem to be solved or it's worth the effort to solve it. How do you think about that and finding, what are whether it's themes or specific items that are really what you go and tackle and put in the roadmap?
Well, so from a operations and member experience, which is our division at Blue Cross, from that perspective, voice of customer, billing and payment feedback represents almost half of the feedback we get quarter over quarter. That's a lot, right? We're a claims processing entity, right? We're a payer, and billing and payments is what we're getting the most of the feedback on. And 66% of that quarter over quarter is negative. So we know that there's a lot of overarching things that we need to work on. So that's our business challenge, right? So finding those things and crystallizing some of those real key things that we think will have the maximum benefit, things like payment wallet, shopping cart, things like making sure that when you have set up auto pay with a credit card and your card expires or it's lost and stolen, we pick up the update from the association, right, using some of the back-end tools that are available in the market, which, by the way, I helped put in right when I was on the bank side, so have just more clarity and understanding of how those work, taking advantage of some of those so that we can do some of that on behalf of members. So doing things like automatic card updates, just like with if you're transacting with Netflix and your card expires. Right. Netflix is going to know that you've got a new card, and we'll easily handle that, and make sure that you don't lose service at all. Well, let's apply that same thinking to healthcare, because if they miss a payment, That could lead to late payment, that could lead to early termination, and then reinstatement is a monster problem, right, for them and us. So little things like that that really don't cost a lot, but are just really smart and make the whole experience better, pay off again and again.
So here's how strongly that resonates with me. I'll tell you a story. It's probably been about 10 years ago, coming back from the beach with my wife and I driving in the car pulls out in front of us, right, coming out of a side road. I swerve to miss it, spin the car around, run into another car, hit 2 other cars. The car that pulled in front of me drives off and is gone. Right, so my car's totaled. I totaled 2 other cars and the cars that I hit. It's pretty scary. Everybody's fine. We get out, call the insurance company. It was fortunately not you guys, someone else, right? And they say, I'm sorry, but you don't have an active policy. I say, what are you talking about? I've been paying this policy for 10 years, right? Well, it was set on auto renew and the card apparently expired, and they didn't notify me that it expired. They just didn't renew the policy. So had my license taken away for a year for driving without insurance. I had to pay for the damage of everyone involved in that accident.
Out of pocket.
And it all stemmed from the fact that I had a card on file. It was an auto renew policy and they didn't update the card number.
Which you believed and had confidence that it was
I just assumed it would happen.
It would
right?
be, and it should. And that's a broken experience.
So thanks for fixing that for your company. That doesn't help me retroactively, but I'm glad to hear that it's top of mind for you.
I would like to know who you're with, and I'll make sure that I avoid
Can't
that.
shame them publicly, because who knows, right? They may be a customer. All right, let's talk a little bit. When we were talking before, one of the interesting things we talked about was your perspective around the digital ID card, right? So again, I have insurance, had insurance for a long time, had my ID card in my wallet, right? I'm used to using it all the time, but I've never thought of it more than a way of when I show up at a doctor's office, they always ask for it, and if I don't have it, it causes a lot of problems. But I know you've got more ideas about what it can mean and how to use it. So tell me about some of those.
Sure. So the idea around ID cards, it's a cost, right, that we take on, and there's some regulation around it. So we issue these plastic IDs, and under threat of we're not going to provide you any services that day. We make sure that you carry this card, and show it to all your providers, and that could be doctor, pharmacy, any provider. And that's worked for a long time. But if we were building a way to offer insurance today, I guarantee you we wouldn't start with a plastic ID card, right? And so and for a while, we offer our mobile app, which is Blue Connect. And in that, you can easily pull up a digital representation of that exact same white card that has a lot of numbers and a lot of things on it, and suitcase logos and all kinds of things that are really, really meaningful, or supposedly they are. And so we found that that has some applicability and utility, but we also see go to the next time you take a train or airplane ride, right? You're going to be issued a ticket, and it's very easy to take that ticket. You can access it through the Delta app, but they're also going to make it very easy to add to your wallet, especially if you're doing commerce with your phone. And so apply that same kind of thinking. Why can't we just take that same ID and have that ported, have the digital credential and ported into your Apple Wallet, Google Wallet, Samsung? What does that mean? What does that do? Well, that's pretty cool, right? It's pretty cool. It doesn't have to do a whole lot, but it opens the door to a new channel, right? That's just a window to a different place. And so the art of the possible kind of comes into play. Like, what can we do with it now? So, not too long ago, we actually participated in a Google hackathon where we were talking about ways to provision these digital IDs. And we were there with other utilities and insurance providers and so forth. We were the only Blue, but the Blue Cross Association was there as well, because unbeknownst to us, they've been talking to them about how to issue digital credentials more effectively across the association. So it opened up a really cool dialogue with us and the association, like, what are you guys doing here? What are you guys doing here? And a lot of the thinking was, they come at it from a very different place. We just wanted to be in the space. It has a cool factor. Our CEO really thought it was neat, and we wanted to just show that you could do it. So we did some proof of concept work last year around that, and so we can issue them. And now we're trying to make sure that we can get the data flow in so that we can easily hang it off out for Blue Connect. But again, if you just showing it a phone is the same thing as showing our app, but it's a little different because there's other technology that you can start flowing in through your mobile provider, right? Through Apple or Google and otherwise. So things like notifications. You could hang all kinds of things that are resident there, signing up for auto pay. Hey, your premium is due. You can build notifications, and because it's in the wallet, you're in close proximity to payment devices, payment vehicles. So what does that mean? And then you can sort of say, well, can I make that credential pop when you're close to a provider and they know that you're going into UNC Healthcare? And so can you make that more meaningful? So the next step is with the association, where they're working to do some early standardization of QR coding that we can also provision right onto that digital ID card too. So that if we can integrate with like an Epic platform or some of these others that help with, that you use to sign in or get, when you show up to your provider, verify your benefits, we can do that with a QR code now. Scan that, and we're setting out some standards. We're working with the association to work on what does that look like in the future. So there's sort of front of the card, which is like provider acceptance and making sure that that's going to be something that providers of all sizes will start, as they start adopting that technology, we can be front and center. And then there's back of the card technology, which is what can we do with it from a payment side, being more payment forward and so forth, just to make it easier to interact with Blue Cross.
How do you think about one of the challenges in healthcare is the complexity of just the various entities involved in anything, right? And when I think through that, I think, okay, great, like I've got it in my iPhone, I can go up to the provider and it can show them, and then they say, can I hold it because I need to put it in the copy machine, right? Like how do you think through things like that when you're coming up with these ideas or solving these problems?
Slowly. It's a journey and it's taken baby steps, right? So we want to do some standardization around that QR code. We think that's what we're going to coalesce around. And the industry feels like that's where we're going to go. Right. So let's be sure that we're being thoughtful about that and what data that QR code has behind it. And so is that meaningful? And we know that there will be providers great and small, right? But your big network providers and certainly your pharmacies like CVS and Walgreens are going to be the first adopters. They generally are from a usability and a customer experience standpoint. They will probably adopt it first and foremost. And so how can we just put that in there and use that as a pull strategy for the others, right? Because, like, if anything else, like, because you're going to start using that, and again, it's from the framework of digital first, right? If I want to be digital first, yeah, I might still need to show that plastic card if the provider that I'm at needs to scan it. But how long do we think scanners are even going to be around, right? There are not more of those. That's not becoming more pervasive. It's less. And then we still have regulation around we have to issue this plastic card, but we also see a day that's probably going to go away. So let's be positioned for that. And the reason, by the way, that the association was so interested in this technology was because they see a need. Specifically, they're looking at it from a use case of Medicaid population. So Medicaid population, as Medicaid services and support strengthens nationwide, and it's also very getting stronger here in the state of North Carolina. Positioning for services around that audience is interesting because they tend to be more transient. Mail deliverability is a problem. So issuing those tried and true plastic cards, which we always feel really safe and secure about, hey, we did that, right? You're not guaranteed that they're going to have that. So we needed a digital solution for that population specifically. Obviously, that's the first step. And we know once we get that right, and that might be the lead-in use case, and we'll expand from there.
So I just learned something interesting. So the physical printing of those plastic cards and mailing them is a regulatory thing? You have to do that? Interesting. I thought you just really like printing plastic for some reason.
No, we don't.
Despite all the ground we've covered, we haven't really talked about real-time payments, right? And do a lot in the real-time payment space. We talk a lot about various providers, various corporates and the use cases. Rarely get a chance to actually talk to someone who is a corporate entity that would be using it. How do you think about real-time payments? What value, if any, does it add for you as a business?
So I want to accept value in any way I can get it. And so things like getting in, access to payment services like PayPal, Google Pay, Apple Pay, so I can be paid immediately are great. Zelle is on our roadmap, right? We want to be able to do those. There's also, I talked about alerts and notifications. There's also certainly a use case, I think, for when a payment is due, reaching out and doing a request for payment, right, and having that transaction occur immediately would be fantastic, right? So we see some of that. It's early gen, and we certainly know there's a lot that we want to be positioned for. We don't exactly know how all that plays out, but we're watching some of the other utilities closely to see who else has this figured out, because I think that's sort of part of it too. We're not sort of trying to be bleeding edge leader of all of this. We definitely want to make sure that we're meeting customers where they want us to be, and not forcing them to be anywhere that we're transacting with. But I also just believe that the new rails that are coming on, they may not be sort of productized and be out front, sort of like Zelle. It might just be that we leverage those rails where it needs to when they need to transact with us.
Right.
And if those become the rails that some of those payments and so forth, either inbound or outbound, right? So provider disbursements, reimbursements back to our members, all of those things, I think there's some use cases there. So we want to do it. I don't know how close we are, probably a few years away, but very interested in what that means, especially, right, we're like anyone else, we're looking at the cost side of this.
Right.
And anything that doesn't ride card rails is of benefit to us.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to the merchant perspective, right? I mean, merchants usually start from how can we reduce the cost of the transaction, especially large volume merchants. Yep. Care less about the mechanism to do it. If it's an RTP rail or a FedNow rail, great. I don't really care. Just how do I create this user experience and how do I do it in their context as cheaply as possible? I imagine it's got to be the same to some extent of the underlying rail is less important than meeting the user need, right? So.
Well said.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. What have we not covered? What is important to what you guys are trying to drive or what you're trying to drive that you feel like is important to cover?
Well, I guess sort of to circle back, meeting members and posturing ourselves in a way that's meaningful to our members. And really, sort of part of my background was also in, like I said, customer relationship management and loyalty program management. And so there's bits and pieces of that we sort of I interweave into sort of a lot of these, use cases. Like, how can we make Blue Cross membership actually feel a little bit more like that membership? And so, but I think that comes down to taking care of. If you're taking care of others, taking care of your parents, right? So aging parents, how can I, what are the things that we're going to be able to do to make their lives easier, your lives as you're managing some of their health care for them on behalf of, or parent, or children, right? There's going to be all kinds of these things that we just need to know that, payment utility or your ability to pay changes month over month. What you can do and where you want to pay me from, this month is going to be greatly different than the next month or 3 months down the road. So just being able to shift and change and pivot as we need to, and offering, more ways to transact, but then also just more ways to find yourself where you need to be, like within the organization. It's a big organization to navigate, right? And so a lot of the things that, I said, I'm sort of payment forward in my thinking, but, we are a really good, claims processing unit. But making sure that members know, I didn't want to say this word, but I can't think of a better one in the moment, but the whole idea of a pizza tracker, so you know where you are in the process of any kind of claims payment. Bringing that sort of this, user or consumer-minded focus, and so that you meet them where they are, regardless of what type of journey that they're on. And knowing that some of those journeys are pretty tough. Right. Really tough.
I mean, that's got to be one of the biggest challenges, and again, just in the healthcare space more broadly, is the lack of transparency in so much of what's happening along the way, right, along the journey. You don't know what bill is tied to what. You don't know what is getting paid when, and I recognize that part is not part of what your business or what you're doing. But certainly the whole life cycle of it pays into it.
It could be, and maybe should be, right? If there are ways that we can simplify just the overall experience of healthcare, we should be there. Right. If that means working with partnering with some of those healthcare providers so that we can do bill presentment and payment acceptance on their behalf, well, what does that mean?
Right.
Does that reduce their operating costs? Does that reduce the overall medical expense of the overall thing because they don't have to send 3 bills to get paid? If they feel like we could send something co-branded, I send everyone an explanation of benefits today. Do you know what an explanation of benefits is?
I know it exists.
You know it exists?
I assume it explains my benefits, but I don't.
And every time you go into a doctor's office, we'll send you one as a Blue Cross member, and it will explain in color detail exactly what the services were provided so that you can match that up against the bill that you're going to get from your provider. Wow, that's a lot of paper. it could be thick. So what if are there ways that we can simplify that, right? And not make someone do analysis, because analysts are few and far between, right? And so and I'm not one necessarily. I don't expect my parents to be one. So are there ways that we could even maybe co-brand some of that so you could simplify it and build trust, because it all comes down to trust and confidence. And it keeps us from having to send you 3 bills and say, oh, well, maybe this is about to go to collections. I probably want to pay this. They've probably talked to Blue Cross by now. And so this takes a lot of that confusion out of the mix, which reduces costs, better for them, better for us.
Cool. Well, let's end with a fun one. So you clearly come across as someone who likes their job, or if not, then you fake it really well. You seem happy. You seem like you're into what you're doing. What's the coolest part of your job? What do you enjoy most about what you do?
Besides being here with you today?
Yeah, clearly this is it.
I mean,
but
this is
outside of
this is the apex right here, right here. The Paytech Pulse podcast, by the way. What I've always enjoyed is partnering and networking and finding sort of unique ways to solve problems, right? That are just that affect all of us. We're kind of all in this together. And so I feel like the best part of my job is that they give me the autonomy and the ability to sort of seek out solutions to sort of age-old problems, or problems that have been sort of pervasive and hard to deal with for our members in our operations group for quite a while. So those are fun challenges without a lot of heavy oversight. We are given the ability to sort of blue sky a little bit and think out of the possible. So that part of it, working for Blue Cross, has been pretty good. I do have a lot of fun doing that.
Awesome.
And hope to continue.
Awesome. Well, thank you, David, for joining us for this
great.
live edition of the PayCLT Payments Hub podcast, live from FinTech, InsurTech Generations. Thank you for joining us, and thank you all for listening and watching.
Thanks all.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.